friends, and thanks for joining me again. And I recently had some comments left on an old video I've had out for a while now. And some people have actually expressed that they were, concerned or were questioning why I would move away from my small, green, more self-sufficient house into a bigger one. Like it was in some way a move backwards. So I want to address this concern right now because I think that there's a lot of, questions about whether or not a big house can be green. But even above and beyond, just an environmental aspect of living in a bigger house, there's also affordability. A lot of people believe that, bigger houses can be more expensive to heat and cool and just lots of different things. And then also self-sufficiency, like a bigger house has more trouble, being off-grid and things like that. So I want to address all of these issues that come up and whether or not, answer the question whether or not a big house can be all of these things. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that a lot of people who want a greenhouse or a self-sufficient house choose to build one. So this is obviously a good option, but the problem is a large amount of the houses on the market are already built. So since there are so many houses on the market that are already built, it might be a greener option to actually go with a house that's already built and then retrofit it to be more green. Because when you obviously are building a house, you're going to have to cut down new trees for the lumber and, just all these different things. So new building products are having to be produced in order to make that house. So from an environmental aspect, at least from the building perspective of it, it does seem that a pre-existing house is actually a better choice. From an affordability option, I have noticed, and it might just be around here, but it's commonly known that a pre-made house or a house that's already been built is actually less expensive per square foot than a new build house. This is because a lot of the houses were built when building supplies were cheaper. So you're kind of locking in that price of when those houses were first built. Not always, there's always exceptions to this. If you have a house that's in the downtown area or if it's a historic house, these types of things, these can typically go a lot higher. But from an affordability standpoint, at least when you first purchase them, pre-existing houses do tend to be cheaper. Now let's talk about self-sufficiency really quick. Now, there are a lot of things that cost, money when it comes to maintaining a house. Of course, there's heat, there's electricity, there's water, these types of things. So I would just like to go over some of my favorite ways really quickly to make an existing house more green, if that's, the choice that someone out there would like to do. So let's address water really quickly first. So if you were living in a smaller house and then you moved into a bigger one, like say we did, we're not taking more showers necessarily than we were before. We're not flushing more toilets, just because we have more toilets doesn't mean that we're flushing them more, that sort of thing. So honestly, I think the best way to save water is actually just to use, low flow faucets on your sinks, and your shower heads and those types of things. As long as your lifestyle is relatively the same, and it wouldn't really affect your water bill because you're going to still be using the same amount of water in a bigger house than you would a smaller one. If your bigger house comes with more property, however, that's something you'll want to consider because that will obviously need more, water to maintain your landscaping and that sort of stuff. So in that instance, it might be better to have a well or something, in addition. So as far as the water goes, it's really easy to figure out. If you just, again, put those low flow stuff on and then your, lifestyle is the same, then you won't be, doing anything that much different. So the water usage in a smaller house is going to be the same as, a larger one, in my opinion, on that one. But when it comes to electricity or heat, this is where the real money starts to come in and where it really can become a little bit more difficult to make a larger house more efficient. So let's address electricity first of all. So a bigger house is going to have more lights. It's going to have more, living areas, which is going to encourage, more items that are going to need, electric usage. And because your house is bigger, it may be easier to have stuff being left on and that sort of thing. So my two favorite ways to reduce the electric usage is one, unplugging everything that we're not currently using. So in our other living room, I'm sure you saw in our house tours or whatever, we do have a electric piano. we just don't keep that plugged in all the time. So we'll leave it unplugged, and then if somebody wants to use it, they know they have to plug it in, and then when they're done using it, they need to unplug it. That sort of thing. So for the most part, we have, everything unplugged when we don't need to, be using it, and then, just plug it in for when we need to use it, which is a very effective way at helping to reduce how much electricity you're using, because a lot of things are still drawing power, even if they're not plugged in. So they call them energy vampires. I've talked about this in another video where I talked about, I think, like 50 ways to reduce your, electric or your utilities. So yes, this is one of my favorite ways for electricity, is just unplugging everything. And then my second favorite way is actually LED bulbs. So you can't get away from having more lights in a bigger house, but you can get away from using more electricity by simply making all of those lights more energy efficient. So of course there's three types of, light bulbs. There's incandescent, there's fluorescent, and then LED. Out of all of those, my favorite is LED because they last really, really long time. And they use the least amount of electricity. They don't have mercury in them like fluorescent do. They don't create a lot of heat, so they don't waste a lot, of energy making heat, which isn't what we're really looking for. We're looking for the light, like incandescents do. So LEDs are the perfect option in my opinion. So when we first moved in this house, we had a ton of incandescent light bulbs, and then we went through and took a whole bunch of them out, upgraded them all to LED, and I can't wait to get my bill in the mail to see the difference between, what it was before when we were running the incandescents up to the LED. So definitely stay tuned for that if that's something you're interested in, how big of a difference that really makes, because I know it makes a fairly big difference. So anyway, yes, and that's the second way, just upgrading to LEDs. So keeping everything unplugged, and then keeping the stuff that you are using more, stuff like lights, make them just more energy efficient in general. So the next thing would be heat. So our house, of course, is, heated with a furnace, but there are different ways that you can get heat for cheaper. So you can choose like off-grid options, stuff like a wood stove. I really do want a wood stove. We would love to put one in this house. Zone heating is another good option. So if you know you're only going to be in one room, you can kind of heat that room instead of heating the whole house. Zone heating is definitely another good option. Another thing that you can have, in place would be a high efficiency furnace. So when we were looking at houses to buy, and when we were looking at this house specifically, we looked at the furnace and we did notice that it was a high efficiency furnace. It was a 90%, I think, efficiency furnace. And then it also has a heat exchanger, which really made me excited because I knew that that means even though this was a bigger house, the furnace was going to be efficient enough that it wasn't going to be a lot more expensive to run. And so far that has been the case. It is a little bit more expensive than the old house, but that's because we haven't done some of the other things to help hold the heat in better. But so far it has been about the same. As far as cooling goes, you can choose a cheaper option there too. Something like a whole house fan can definitely help, reduce the bills because it's a lot cheaper to run than, AC. Another option would be like an evaporative cooler. Obviously those are a lot cheaper too. We had one of those in our old house and I loved it. And then my last tip is going to be ways that you can actually hold the heat in the winter or keep the heat out in the summer. And that's going to be just insulate and seal. I cannot speak enough about insulating and sealing. So our house has an attic over a portion of it, and then the other portion it doesn't. So that's, an area where we can't really do much on. But we can insulate and seal pretty much every room of every portion of this house. And when it comes to insulating and sealing, they have it listed into 3 categories, A, B, and C. And the way this basically goes is attic, bottom, and center. So the attic is by far the most important place to be able to add insulation. It's going to make the biggest impact on your bills because obviously heat rises. So if we have heat and our attic is improperly insulated or inadequately insulated, all that heat is just going to go straight through our attic. And so all this, heat that we've paid for just gets lost to the environment. So the attic is the number one place, to add, an investment if you can to add some extra insulation. That'll make the biggest difference. The bottom, it depends on what kind of a house you have. If you have a crawl space, you can insulate the crawl space or at least the floor, under your house. If you have a basement, you can insulate your basement, that sort of thing. But because heat rises, what happens through natural convection is the heat goes up, it pulls in cold air from underneath, and it kind of gets blown or pushed into your home. So by insulating it, it helps keep that natural convection from occurring. So it keeps the cold from coming in by insulating the attic. It's keeping it from going out. Basically what you're doing is holding the temperature that you want in your house in. So that definitely, is a good place to insulate to the bottom. And then the last priority is one of my favorites. Okay, they're all my favorite. But it's the center because it's the easiest to do and it's the least expensive. So weather stripping around doors, caulking, this sort of stuff, insulating your windows with insulating curtains, different stuff like this. It makes a huge difference on your comfort level because you don't have all this cold air coming in, and robbing, your space of the heat. But it also makes it to where you're not sitting in a room and it's all cold because all this cold air is coming in through a drafty window, that sort of thing. They say that it makes the least difference out of the three, but I definitely think it's the most important. And again, it's very inexpensive and very easy to do. So definitely don't overlook that. So if you make all of these changes to an older, bigger house, you can make it into a greenhouse. Not a greenhouse, but a green house. A house that's more environmentally friendly, a house that can be more self-sufficient, and a house that's more affordable in general. So definitely, I don't think that, you have to have a smaller house in order for it to be inexpensive to heat or cool. I don't think you have to have a smaller house in order for it to be self-sufficient because there are a lot of things that you can do to add to it in order to make an impact and a big difference. So anyway, hopefully this addresses your questions on whether or not a big house can be green. I really do believe they can be. You just gotta be smart about it. Anyway, hope you found this video helpful. I'm Frugal Green Girl. We'll see you next time.